Unless you want to draw all your characters with straight-on faces, you'll have to figure out a way to draw eyes at different angles. Sure, drawing one eye is fine, but how about the second one that's at a slightly different angle? From my years of doing illustrations, I've compiled a 5-step workout that will help you draw eyes from any angle. Instead of some cookie cutter tips and tricks to resolve unrelated problems as they arise, we'll start fresh and build from a simplified idea of an eye and bypass all the usual bad habits altogether. There aren't any serious requirements to this tutorial, but you should be able to make simple lines and be somewhat familiar with doing perspective drawings of planes and ellipses. Lastly, and surprisingly, just hearing me talk isn't going to help you draw better, so let's get started right away. With learning anything in art, the first step is to start with simple shapes. As beginners, we tend to conceal our inexperience behind the complexity of noise, which delay us from facing our weaknesses head on. Here I've come up with 3 warm-up exercises that will help us get used to the basic shapes of an eye. And I'll link the references in the description if you need them. The most basic shape of an eye is that of a sphere, which on paper is just a circle. Without corners or vanishing points, we'll have to exploit overlaps and contour lines to give us the illusion of depth and proper orientation. A couple of things to watch out for as you do the warm-up exercise is that clean overlap is really important to indicate the ring from going in front of the sphere to behind the sphere. And try practice drawing through the shape and erasing it afterwards, at least for now, carrying the energy of the ring behind the sphere and really sell the fact that this shape, this ring continues behind the sphere. Treat these drawings like warm-ups. Don't hyper-focus on being perfect, but do focus on being clean and not sloppy. In the second warm-up exercise, we'll take our sphere and put it through a hole on the plane, a simplified version of an eye socket. Start with the plane, roughly create a hole where the sphere might sit, and draw in the sphere afterwards. If you're struggling with planes or circles in perspective, make sure you note that down for future practice, but now you can rely on the reference images. Follow the contour lines from the plane, over the sphere, behind it, and re-emerging again. Once you've tried a couple, make up a few from imagination or flip and mirror the references. In the next warm-up, I've taken the models from the previous exercise and draped a soft sheet over it. Since the sheet or eyelid really follow the contour of the plane and sphere, it's exactly the same as the previous exercise, except now we no longer need to follow the sphere so rigidly. But on the flip side, and the main lesson here, is that we have to learn to see through the organic shapes or noise and still be able to see the underlying structure. Start by constructing the plane and hemisphere as you would in the previous exercise. But now instead of the strict contour over the plane and sphere, you can connect them with more rhythm and energy as you were doing for the ring in the first warm-up exercise. Again, practice drawing through the form, and as you erase the construction lines, notice the clean overlaps really give a real sense of depth to the drawing. Take liberties on how you interpret the reference, but keep reminding yourself of the basic shape underneath. Again, treat these like warm-ups. Don't hyper-focus on being perfect, but do focus on being clean and not sloppy. Now go and have fun, see what kind of eyes you can create with these super simple models. To continue adding complexity to our simple model of an eye, I'll now introduce the Pac-Man eye, a simplified yet exaggerated model of an eye. At the core of the eye is a sphere with the bulge of the iris at its front. It's protected by the eyelids or a simple outer shell with thicknesses that follow its spherical form. It sits in this very weird frame of the eye socket, but once you've seen it covered, it can be seen as a simple shelf with two different planes. And to put this into practice, I now introduce the Pac-Man eye map. Again, I'll have the references in the description if anyone needs them. I've compiled a bunch of different angles here, even including a few useless edge cases. I've highlighted the most useful section in red, but we obviously need the center eyes as well. We will study these in 3 different approaches. First, pick one of the corners you would like to start with. In this first approach, we will copy or trace over the different angles within this corner somewhat carefully, specifically noting how the thickness of the eyelid passes behind the eyeballs and how it behaves in front of the eyeball. Secondly, we'll see how the shape of the iris or the dark of the eye, the bulge, changes its shape as it moves around in different angles. Thirdly, think about how the eyelids meet the plane of the eye socket and creates an angle. As I mentioned, these models are pretty exaggerated. Real eyelids do not have this level of thickness, and although eyes are spheres, they do not protrude to this level that seems like a frog. The point here is to really drive home and emphasize the three-dimensional aspect of the eye. After you make the copy, draw a few cross contour lines vertically down the eye and observe how it goes in and out and curve around different shapes. Finish up this section by drawing a few more of the neighboring eyes. For one of the eyes, I explicitly drew in the different planes of the eye socket, which I found pretty useful as well. For the second approach, we'll move to a different corner to study on. This time we'll be drawing with the planar or angular approach for the outer shell by turning them into flat planes. Specifically, we're looking for the 2 corners on the top eyelid, which will be important landmarks for the type of eyes a person has. And this will be a very important tool for later when we analyze and build more complex shapes. Unlike this person, you know that most people's eyelashes grow uniformly along a plane with a slight curve upward. We can adapt this to our Pac-Man model by adding a little duckbill, similar to the way we were drawing the Saturn rings. Here I have compiled some examples, but again, it's simply another application of the Saturn ring warm-up we did earlier. Be gestural, have fun, see what kind of eyes you can come up with by playing with the Pac-Man or Duckman model. And now we'll take our Pac-Man eye and use it to analyze master artists. We won't be making exact copies, but instead we'll be taking the master's work as guides. We'll also see subtle ways that master artists indicate features of the eyes that as beginners we could have easily missed. We will start with the artist Loish, who draws really simple eyes but look amazingly 3D. Notice how she draws the eyelashes over the contour of the sphere like a plane as we discussed earlier, and we notice that the longer lashes are on the end bits here. You can see that she also used a little thin highlight to indicate the thickness of the upper eyelid. Like we did before in warm-up number 3, look past the beautiful noise of colors and rendering, just focus on the basic shapes. In this case, her eyes are tilted up, but also her pupils are pointed upwards as well. This is a super cool example, I think. Her eyes are closed, and most of us mortals would have just drawn the eyelids and be done, where the master showcased the entire eye despite us not being able to see it. Having the right shapes and overlap, you can really make the eyes look super expressive and cool looking despite not seeing any of it. Also with the shading, you can see that the artist really emphasized the two different planes of the eye socket and the cheekbones coming out. For comparison, we'll now look at the art of Sanda's art, who has a flatter and more anime style. We can see now that despite the fact that it's a very simplified style, he's not just drawing some random polygon for the eye. The curvature all has a purpose that wrap around the eyeball. Sam himself is actually a masterful portrait painter, but just because he changed his style didn't change the knowledge he acquired while he was doing portraits. You can also do a quick draw over with the angular approach, see how this eye is angled and how he collapsed this node to have the eye slant upward. Again, here is another example of a subtle but simple way to sell a closed eye with a beautiful indication of the full eyeball underneath. This just goes to show again that a masterful artist can sell you on an eye that you don't even see by knowing the structure underneath. Finally, we look at the artist Wang Jie Li, who draws more realistic, but also who's more impressionistic. What that means is that he doesn't explicitly draw things or shapes, but suggest or indicate them. We'll see things that were mere suggestions and not fully drawn out. This is the exact opposite to our Pac-Man approach, where we try to explicitly and clearly draw everything. We'll gain valuable lessons and see things we didn't notice before. For example, the way he subtly transitioned in and out of showing the thickness of the bottom plane of the eyelid. He made a feast out of describing the eyelid traversing from the front of the eyeball to behind it, with merely the smear of some brushstrokes or pen strokes. And for the bottom lid, it's not a full 90-degree brute force plane change that we have for the Pac-Man eye, but a gentle slant that's created by the subtle shading. Now, don't pick too many artists. I would say just pick one or two that are your favorite and do a few angles from each artist and move on to the next section. In the spirit of increasing complexity and information, we'll now look at some real eyes with all the information of color, texture, hair, shadow, and light. It's a little overwhelming, but again, stick to the essentials. Pick out the eye model that matches the reference. In this case, it's a fairly straight-on eye with the pupil looking up leftwards. Don't confuse the overall angle of the eye with the direction of the pupil. To further reduce the complexity, I'm using the angular approach from step number 2. That way I'm forced to simplify all the subtle softer shapes even more. There's no correct way to break down the plane. As you do more, you'll naturally fall into the rhythm of deciding for yourself where to put the angles or nodes. Don't worry about getting messy while you're figuring it out, but make sure you clean it up afterward. These are workouts, but also notes you can review later. So give your future self a little hand by keeping it clean. Here, I've also color coded the different planes of the Pac-Man eye with bright colors. For the next eye, I've decided to go with the softer, rounder approach. Again, pick out a eye model from the map that fits. Whenever there is information that's unclear or has too much complexity, just simplify it to the Pac-Man model. Finally, an eye from Straight On. It's a pretty simple eye, but since we're only using line art and no shading, it's useful to color code the planes afterward to remind ourselves the planes that are there. Remember to steal the things you liked from your favorite artists. I like the way Loish drew her eyelashes like a complete plane instead of tedious little needles. And so this is the perfect opportunity to use that trick. Here in the final step, we'll focus on something quite different. We'll be drawing eyes in pairs. Start with a simple plane, roughly divided into thirds. There is about one eye length between the two eyes. Note that in perspective, the thirds get smaller and smaller as we get further away. Now place the first eye To draw the second eye, note that it's on a slightly different angle. Use parallel lines to make sure the two eyes line up top and bottom, but also use arcs to make sure that the angles are somewhat matching. The focus is on the pairing itself. Too often I see beautifully drawn eyes but paired weirdly together, and that throws people off. I have zero experience with drawing anime, so don't judge me on this, but the basic theory is the same for anime eyes. One little modification we can make for them is to make sure that we flatten out the sphere of the eyeball more to make sure they are coherent with a more flat style. But it's also important to note that they're not completely flat. Here the angle is pretty extreme, so the difference in the way the two eyes are facing is even more obvious. It's a pretty weird angle with all the features scrunched up in perspective, but the good news is that you can get away with drawing the two eyes quite differently because not too many people out there are expert of eyes at this angle and can call you out on it. Ideally, you're not just drawing eyes in vacuum. In the proper context of a head drawing, you'll have a simple scaffolding or model for a head, like a Loomis head, that will give you placements for where you put the eyeball or the plane of the eyes. You might still want to explicitly draw in the eyeballs, but erase it afterwards. You certainly can go over all 5 of these exercises in a day, but you can also spread them out. The warm-ups and the Pac-Man eyes are quite suitable for warm-up practices before drawing anything else. With the simple model of the Pac-Man eye, there's also an infinite room for inventing weird eyes and coming up with your own, so have fun with it. The other studies you can use before attempting to create your own character. Once you've decided the features of your character, you can look up artists and references you want to combine into your own. Again, check the links for the reference pictures if you didn't want to take screenshots. I'll combine all the workout footages in real time and put it up somewhere as well. Leave comments and questions down below or via Instagram, like and sub. Thanks for watching.